It is another episode of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng alongside Brad Bierman. Thanks so much for joining us on this Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. We've got so much to talk about as always. We begin today's show with the Syracuse basketball team. They won their third out of their last four games, rallying from 17 points down to top Notre Dame, 77-69 on Saturday. Brad, what did you think of the win, and where's Syracuse headed from here?
Wes, I really was impressed with the comeback. Hard not to be, because the way the team has played this season, when you see them down, it has been rare to see a comeback of this sort. And really was impressed to see that comeback, more so beating a team you already lost to in a game that came down to the wire in early December in South Bend. And what I also like about what I've seen here is the combinations and Red's coaching here and the adjustments he's made. He's gotten a ton of criticism, as we've talked about. Is he the right man for the job? Can he make it to year number 3, et cetera? Well, we've talked about the great recruiting class he's got coming in next year, and let's let the season play out as we've talked about. I remember our conversation before the Maryland game. Is this team going to win 10 games? Well, I'm kind of trying to focus now on where they're going to go. Are they going to win 10 games in the ACC and finish 10-10? Because the way the conference is shaping up, West, to me, a 500 record, I know it's mediocre finishing at 500, but it may be a good sign, if you will, for this team with how competitive this league is, for a Syracuse team that has tremendous difficulty winning on the road in conference play, has to win home games. And as I look at the schedule, I mean, I see 8 wins. I don't quite see 10, so they'll have to show me something to get to that 10-10 point. But that's what I'm kind of trying to look at 3-4 right now, 9-9 overall. Are there at least seven more wins in those 13 games?
Yeah, so Brad, to your point, I think we all have a lower expectation for the Syracuse basketball team. So anytime you can claw out an ACC win, that's a good day. It's a good day. So they should relish the moment. They should enjoy it. And credit where credit is due, because I think the general sentiment when Syracuse fell behind 11-0 3 minutes in is that this was going to be a really long day for the Orange Faithful. And this Syracuse team just refused to go away. They kept chipping away at the lead. And J.J. Starling, obviously, with a little extra motivation against his former team, really played outstanding basketball, especially in that second half, which is what you expect from your leading scorer. But I also looked at the schedule, Brad. Syracuse is at Clemson tomorrow evening. The Tigers are 7-1 so far in ACC play, so I don't think that's a game that you're going to put in that win column, especially because, again, it is on the road. So here's where I circled, and I think we're both in agreement on this. I'm particularly interested in the following game against Pitt. Again, at home, a really good bellwether game for the Orange. They're tied in the standings at 3-4. We'll see how closely they play the Panthers. If they play a good game, then yeah, I think they can approach that 8-9 win ACC total and not have the not 10 effing games, as Jim Boeheim said, maybe I guess it was 15 years ago now with Jerry McNamara. If they can be competitive, if they can eke out a win against the Panthers, which again is a peer school with them, not only in the standings, but of course just throughout history in their basketball programs, that would be a really good sign for me that Syracuse can continue to compete.
I agree, Wes, but winning on the road, we talked about Pitt's a home game, so I agree. Total bellwether game. We're going to see them against peer program, how they're competing against a Pitt team that's really, I think, overperformed this year. But that West Coast trip following that's going to be tough to see if you can, get one win there. Stanford and Cal have played, I think, better than most people would expect, especially coming off their performances in Carolina last weekend. And at home, certainly a different story. Duke is Duke. North Carolina is North Carolina. Certainly think they're beatable, especially a game in the Dome. And I see Syracuse getting wins against BC and Miami. It's in those other games like a Pitt, those other kind of bellwether games, NC State, Virginia Tech, SMU, and Virginia to end the season. But I think the team is going to improve between now and then. I've seen steady improvement in the month of January. Expect to see somewhat consistent improvement in the month of February that takes us up to the end of the season. That will be interesting to see that development of this coaching staff and challenging these players to perform at their best level.
So, Brad, we move on. On Monday, the college football season officially ended as Kyle McCord's old team, Ohio State, won the national championship. Brad, that officially means we are starting the 2025 season today. So what do you have for us in terms of notes for the spring?
Well, the number 20 ranking, Wes, I think really has to be talked about. I mean, Syracuse is a top 20 football program. I'm thinking back to last August. We were talking about how many wins. We had guests on the show, Rich Scanlon, some of the other former players. This is an eight win team, 7-win team, one better than last year. And would we have said last August, oh, this is going to be a top 20 program, right? Would we have said that, Wes? No, right?
No,
We would not have
no.
said that. So what a job Fran Brown has done with excelling at the transfer portal, getting the most out of his team, overcoming some injuries to certain players that were significant at the time during the season, beating these ranked teams, winning the bowl game in convincing fashion. So what do you do for an encore? Well, you know what Fran Brown wants to do for an encore? He wants to make the college football playoffs. Now, is Syracuse going to be in line to do that? Well, I'm not putting anything to judge this program going into next year. Everyone's talking about, okay, play 4 teams that were in the CFP this past year, all on the road, starting with Notre Dame, the national runners-up, Miami, Clemson, and SMU. Well, they're going to be different teams in 2025, just like Syracuse is going to be a different team. So let all that play out, start with the opener, Tennessee. But I did want to share where Syracuse is going to be next, or coming into the spring. A little note from the coaches convention in Charlotte a couple of weeks ago. Got a chance to spend a couple minutes with offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon in a very casual, kind of off the record atmosphere. And we were talking about the quarterback room and what he thought early on, and getting some thoughts on front runners and where they're kind of looking. And I certainly think the name Ricky Collins, the LSU transfer, is going to become really prominent in the minds of Syracuse fans moving forward, just in kind of fleshing out Jeff Nixon in that conversation. But careful to add that plenty of competition in that room. And I think they're still looking to see what's going to be available from the quarterback spot in the late transfer period.
So, Brad, on a recruiting angle, there's underclassmen coming this Saturday, the 25th, and we've been able to sniff out some of the visitors for this weekend. That includes several prospects that hold offers. 2027 running back O.C. Yearwood, he'll be in town. Kalen Reese and Kalen Hicks from local CBA in Syracuse, they're going to be on campus. And one other person I want to highlight here is Jaden Carey, 2027 athlete, also from Syracuse CBA. A source telling me the staff really likes him a lot. I could definitely see him announcing a Syracuse offer after the trip. And the last player I wanted to talk about was Messiah Hampton, one of the top 2026 prospects in New York State in his cycle. He's hearing a lot from Ohio State. Syracuse trying to keep him in the Rochester native at home. He'll visit Syracuse next week. So a lot going on for Fran Brown and company as we get closer to spring ball. I really want to keep – we talked about bellwethers in basketball. This is a recruiting bellwether for football because Fran Brown talks about keeping New York State players at home. Now you have Ohio State, the defending national champion, knocking at the door. Can Fran Brown close the New York border, keep Hampton at home in the 2026 cycle? That's going to be really interesting to see.
You going to bet against him, Wes?
After this season, I don't bet against anything. So we're going to take a quick break. Andrea Adelson, when we return, this is the Juice on the Cuse podcast. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection on odds from everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL to UFC. BetOnline is the number one betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Back on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng here with you. It's our great pleasure to be joined by ESPN's Andrea Adelson. Andrea, thanks so much for coming back on the program.
Oh my God, Wes, I'm like your biggest fan because you always ask me to come on. So thank you. Thank you so much for making me feel like I matter.
Oh, you definitely matter, Andrea. And I want to get you started on this one. A really fun game in the college football playoff title game, Ohio State holding off Notre Dame. Now that the dust is settled, I want to get your take on the expanded college football playoff bracket as we saw it this year and what the future is. Are we going a 14 team, 16? And I have to think they're going to have to work on the seeding issues as well.
Yeah, great questions. And so I'll try to answer them. piece by piece. I think it was a rousing success, quite honestly, a 12-team playoff. I know the first round games weren't as exciting as folks maybe had hoped. And, my answer to that is with a home field advantage for a reason. You're going to have a home field advantage. Of course, all the home teams won. And the home teams that won were the higher ranked teams, as you just alluded to with the seeding. But once we got into the quarterfinals, semifinals, and even parts of the national championship game, I thought were really compelling and fun and expanded out the number of teams that have an opportunity to compete, right? When you can see a Boise State against a Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl, that's exciting for more than just a closed off conference fan base. And of course, that fan base, the SEC that I'm referring to, didn't even have a team in the national championship game. So I think has been a lot of SEC fatigue. And so now the last couple of years, seeing other teams getting opportunities, I think that's been great for college football. Now, in terms of what the future looks like, I think it's probably going to be difficult for 2025 to make wholesale changes, because that's going to require unanimous vote from all the conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director. The more likely scenario that I think we're going to see is moving into 2026. You don't need that unanimity anymore. So I think we're probably going to get to 14 teams, and they're probably going to adjust the seeding issue that you just alluded to. I still think they're going to give conference champions a spot. I don't necessarily think they're going to get those top 4 automatic buys, because number one, it was confusing seeing what the rankings looked like 1 through 12, but that was different when you start slotting in those top 4 conference champions. Didn't look the same as what the rankings looked like. But also, if you are ranked number 3, you probably deserve to have one of those buys and not have to play in the first round. I think Notre Dame likes the arrangement that they have, basically saying we don't have to qualify for a bye because they know they don't play in a conference championship game. So I would be very surprised if there were a ton of changes for 2025. And I think more likely we'll see a couple more teams added and adjustment to the seeding moving forward.
So, Andrea, one of the things that I've seen during bowl season that frustrated a lot of fans was the timing of the transfer portal, right? The teams that were playing in the regular season just weren't the same teams in the postseason. You're seeing a lot of second and even third string players. Do you like the new transfer window being pushed back to January? And what other changes would you like to see with the portal? And if you have time, NIL?
Yeah, great questions. And I think there's a reason that this feels like it needs to be adjusted every year, because even the folks in charge are not aware of all the unintended consequences once they start putting rules like this into place. And so that goes for the transfer portal. They thought they fixed things by making it a smaller window this year, but it turns out when you have an expanded playoff and your games start earlier, that window hurts. And we saw a couple of instances of guys opting out of those games so they could enter the transfer portal and find a new home. But then you also had instances of coaches complaining about players on their own teams having to turn off their phones because they're getting recruited by others to see, well, once your season ends, do you want to come transfer and play with us? So it was a mess. I'm not sure the January window is going to work, I think, for a few reasons. I think, number one, I think once the semester ends, because this has to line up with the academic calendar, right? They still are student athletes, even though it feels like a lot of that has been lost with NIL and revenue share. But it is tied to an academic calendar, which makes things more challenging when you are talking about a free agency or the portal, as it's known in college. So I think once the semester ends, those players should absolutely be allowed to have that opportunity to hit the transfer portal and see where they may want to end up and go to school. And when you narrow it down to just those 10 days, I believe in January, there are some schools that are going to start before that window closes. And so then it's a matter of, well, like, how do we get guys into school? Because you got to be enrolled for the spring semester. The whole point of transferring now in December is so you can be enrolled and there for spring football. And so I think because they've tried to increase all these opportunities for student athletes over the last 5 years, narrowing a window, that might not work because it's going to be like, well, why are you taking something away from us, right? They're not supposed to be taking anything away. They're supposed to be adding opportunity. So I don't know what to do about the portal window, because I think it's a legitimate concern for coaches and for players, quite honestly. I mean, Kevin Jennings didn't like it that teams were coming after him, and he knew he was staying at SMU. So I don't know what the real solution is there. And in terms of NIL, I think it would be nice if there was some transparency involved in what these contracts or these deals looked like, because, a lot of this right now is a market in which nobody really knows or understands what their value is, because you're not really sure what other guys are getting. But you've also got agents playing other schools against each other, and you don't really know if offers they've gotten from other schools are legitimate, if you're just trying to get more money for your guy by saying, well, I've got $1 million here, can you give me $2 million? How do you know that $1 million is a real offer? So there are concerns with that. And I think there's a hope among administrators that revenue share is going to ease some of those concerns, because it's going to be up to schools now that are going to be paying a lion's share of that money. The NIL will come kind of on top of that. But I think that administrators want to see at least some uniformity in what these deals are looking like, and some transparency, so that everyone can kind of be on the same page with all that.
Yeah, even the pros have contracts and they have salary caps. So maybe something like that. Andrea, I want to move you to a different topic. You're an ACC expert. You've watched a lot of ACC football in the last decade plus. So how worried should the ACC be about only getting 2 combined bowl wins this postseason? And you also wrote about this earlier in the week about the conference championship and the rules that may change as a result of that. Do you think that will help?
Yeah, it was a horrible bowl season. I don't think there's any question about that. You can't go 2-11 and sit here and think, well, the perception is going to change about the ACC. It just kind of reinforces what people think, in that it's a conference that isn't elite enough to compete at the super highest levels. And in this case, it wasn't the elite teams that were holding up their end of the bargain either. Syracuse did, and Louisville did, and those are 2 of the better teams in the league. But in terms of Clemson, Miami, Florida State, right, the people everybody's looking at to kind of carry the flag for the ACC, it didn't happen this postseason. So it's not great. And especially when you look at the playoff and moving forward, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to sit here and argue we deserve 4 automatic spots. That's why we need to get to 14. We deserve our 4 automatic spots. I think chances are high that they're probably going to get those. And what does that mean for the ACC moving forward? You can't really make an argument right now that they deserve to be in that conversation when you're going 2-11 in bowl season and 0-2 in the first round of the college football playoff. And so I think there's hope that with revenue share, with added money that's coming in, more ACC teams will give themselves an opportunity to really compete. But the problem now is that the Big Ten, I think, has hugely benefited from revenue share and the NIL, because they have got really large blue blood programs with fan bases that eagerly want to see their teams do well. And so look at Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. Those 3 teams were in the playoff, and 2 of them won the national championship the last 2 years. And so I think we're moving into an era with the portal and rev share and NIL, where it might be even harder for the ACC than ever before. And so that leads to your question about the ACC championship game. Now, there's been discussion across the landscape, not just in the ACC, about using the last weekend of the regular season as like a play-in weekend, where you kind of ramp up to your conference championship game to create more opportunities potentially for your league to get multiple bids in headed into the expanded playoff. And I don't know where this is in terms of where coaches and athletic directors stand on this. I asked Brent Key about it yesterday in Atlanta, and he's like, I haven't even thought about it. I want to hear what the commissioner has to say about it first. And I'm pretty sure that's what most administrators and coaches are going to say once I start making all those calls this week. But the idea is basically a launching off point from what Rhett Lashley said leading up to the ACC championship game. They're 8-0 in ACC play, right? They're 11-1, and they're sweating it out. If we lose the ACC championship game, we might lose our spot. And Rhett Lashley's like, well, would it be better if we just refuse to play in the game so we can guarantee that we're in the playoff? And so, when you hear your coaches saying that, you're like, well, are there creative ways to do this? Are there ways that we can make sure that we're getting the teams in that deserve to be in? So I think that's the iteration for what Jim Phillips was talking about, whether it is the number one team not playing in the ACC championship game to kind of preserve that spot, and then your 2 and 3 teams play so you can at least guarantee a second spot. Or that play-in game, what I was referring to, 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, the last weekend of the regular season, and then the winners play in the ACC championship game. Obviously, still a lot of logistics to work out, because the first question is, well, let's say they go with that. Our number one team is going to get a bye, and then we're going to have our conference championship game with 2 versus 3. Well, who gets the automatic berth? Is it the team that plays in the ACC championship game? Is it your regular season champ? Do they both get to call themselves ACC champions? I think we all know how important that is for programs, coaches, and players, and there's contract bonuses as it relates to a lot of that. But I do not fault the ACC for trying to think of scheduling in a creative way, because scheduling was a huge issue for them this year. That was a knock against SMU, and to a smaller extent, it was a knock against Miami and against Clemson. And so if you're trying to think of how can we help our strength of schedule so it's not used against us, how can we make sure our ACC championship teams are there, the teams that we feel deserve to be there, I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking about it in a creative, different way. Certainly, I think the ACC is going to have a different approach than the other conferences, in my view.
And so, Andrew, we'll get you out of here in this one. We were talking pre-show, we text, we email, and I want you to take another victory lap, because a first-year head coach coming into, who's ever a coordinator, coming in to be a head coach and predicting that team is going to go to a bowl is I think pretty ballsy. And you did it, and you made that prediction. So please take your victory lap. You deserve every bit of it.
Thank you so much for making me seem smart. That's, I think, the one thing I got right this year. Let's see, Miami, ACC champion, wrong. Miami versus Clemson in the ACC championship game, wrong. Let's see, Florida State, third in the ACC, wrong.
Okay, so none of us saw that scenario. That third one, none of us saw that, and I think no one said, oh, you were just off by one team. So let's again, don't be so hard on yourself.
Well, again, thank you for always making me feel so good. You're like my cheerleader. But look, I was impressed with Fran. We talked about this when I was on in the preseason back in the spring when I took a visit up there. People use this word culture. It's like, what does this mean? What does this mean? You can tell that already he has got this buy-in from these players, that this is a culture that these guys have embraced, they want to be in. And what is to me, the number one thing that shows that proves that? Everybody played in the bowl game. I mean, seriously, how many opt-outs across the entire country, or like half in, half out, did we see this year? The fact that every single guy from Kyle McCord to LaQuint Allen played in this game, Aronde Gadsden, that tells you that these guys believe in not just what Fran Brown is doing, but the culture of this program, which is, we love to play football. We're going to take advantage of every opportunity that we have. And you saw the joy with which this team played this year. You saw the joy with which Fran Brown coached this team. It makes you want to play for a guy like that. And it also makes you want to play for the guys around you. And so I think we got a small glimpse of that in the spring and the preseason, and even in the behind the scenes show on ACC Network in August. You kind of saw the building blocks of where this was headed. Obviously, Kyle McCord has a year for the record books, and I don't know that I thought he'd be good. I don't know that anyone saw leading the nation in passing, right? And the development of the defense, the development of younger guys too, by the way, not just the guys that were coming back. So it's an outstanding year, no question. We had Fran Brown on our Inside Access show a few weeks ago, and he's like, yeah, I know the bar is much higher now. I know people are going to be coming for us now off a 10-3 season. So he's working that much harder to prove that this isn't just a one-hit wonder, that this is sustainable, that this is something that we can do year after year, particularly after losing a lot of the really key players on this team. But, I had so much fun watching Syracuse this year. And I have a feeling that even if you were not rooting for Syracuse and didn't have your orange glasses on, you probably were still rooting for them too.
Well, Andrea, you know I always root for you. Thank you so much for coming back on the program. ESPN's Andrea Adelson. Andrea, obviously, goes without saying, you're one of my favorite guests, but again, you're one of my favorite guests. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate
Well,
it.
you're one of my favorite podcast hosts. So thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in August, right? We're doing
I
this
will,
again in August.
1,000%. We'll talk to
Okay.
you soon. Take care, Andrea.
Thank you. You too.
Welcome back to the Juice on the Cuse podcast on the Rivals.com and Believe Networks with my longtime colleague, Wes Cheng. I'm Brad Bierman. And Wes, I know we mentioned the great season, Syracuse finishing in the top 20, but out of the CFP. And my final thought today is on the first college football playoff expanded to 12 teams. It just completed with Ohio State beating Notre Dame. I think they've got to do some tweaks to this now. They've had the first year. Are they going to add teams or not? But even if they don't, I think they've got to kind of move it up here in December, maybe do something with the Army-Navy game that second week of December and open the playoffs then, because I kind of thought the college football season got lost at the end with the NFL playoffs. And if you think about it, teams started way back August 3rd for Syracuse, and the last two teams were playing January 20th, and a month and a half after other teams have stopped. Really kind of a unique dynamic there. And I think also the ACC is going to look at making an adjustment too to how they put teams into the conference championship game to make sure that it's going to have the best opportunity for multiple teams to get into the CFP, whether it's 12, 14, or even bigger. And I think that's going to be really important to see as Syracuse develops, the Orange trying to fight for a spot in the playoffs by getting to the championship game or advancing by not even playing in the championship game, as some teams have done this past year.
Yeah, Brad, I think both you and our guest today, Andrea Adelson, had some really good suggestions on how to improve what we saw. And I think there was a compelling product that was put on the field, maybe not so much in the early games, but certainly in the later games. I thought we saw some really compelling games. And I would love to see some of these changes implemented because as a fan watching college football, I absolutely want to see the best product on the field, and I want them to hold my attention, to your point. And Brad, I want to close the show on Syracuse women's ice hockey goalie Allie Kelly. She set the NCAA record for saves in an overtime loss to number 9 Penn State on Friday. So she recorded 41 saves in the game. That's 4,176 saves. That passed the previous record of 4,167. So just a really impressive record. You don't really see this kind of record being held by people from Syracuse. And it's just nice to see people like Allie and people like Kyle McCord set some really interesting records. So congratulations to her. What a great career she's had.
Love to find those Olympic sport athletes that shine on the SU campus. We don't get to talk about them enough on the show, but really great to see their performance and peak performance like that from women's hockey.
That's it for us. For Brad Bierman, this is Wes Cheng. You've been watching the Juice on the Cuse podcast on the Believe in Rivals networks, and we will see you next time.